Hello to everybody taking critical issues in higher education. This, once again, is your Professor John Fobert. I hope you are having a great week. And this week's topic is religion and spirituality on campus. So they say the two things you should never talk about with friends are, what are they? That's right, politics and religion. So, of course, we're at least going to get into one of those in this class. And we'll talk about issues of religion and spirituality on campus. One of the thoughts from the people who authored your readings for this week, Stanley Fish, mentioned that the center of intellectual energy these days on college campuses is religion, and that is something that has become all the more controversial and discussed. And so we're going to talk a little bit, I guess a lot of bit this week, about the issues that surround religion, spirituality, all those sorts of issues that have really captured the attention of folks in higher education, and really have always, one way or the other, been something that's been of importance to discuss if you want to understand higher education and how it functions in the United States. Now, one of the things that I've found over time in attempting to understand the debates about religion and spirituality on campus is to make sure that we understand both the worldview of the individual who's speaking or writing about it, and how that worldview affects different operational definitions they may have for certain topics. So that could be, for example, someone who has one kind of worldview might define religion in one way or spirituality in another way, and someone with a different kind of worldview may define those terms very differently, yet talk about them as if they're talking about the same thing. So one of the things I think it's very important that we do is to understand what it is that differentiates different worldviews that are common within higher education, and what it is that tends to characterize the operational definitions that people have with differing worldviews. Now, there are lots of different worldviews that are out there, but I want to summarize a few of those just so that we get off to a start this week with many of the common worldviews you're likely to see in higher education. The first one is called rationalism. Rationalism is essentially the philosophical point of view that regards reason, reason being the key word, as the chief source of knowledge and the chief test of knowledge within higher education. For example, Thomas Jefferson was a rationalist, and he, in referring to his alma mater, the College of William and Mary, said, "For here we shall not be afraid to tolerate any error so long as reason is left free to combat it." So he believed, as do other rationalists, believe that reason is the ultimate source and test of knowledge. They tend to believe that knowledge is truth. If they're asked what truth is, they'll say, well, truth is knowledge. It's a school of thought that believes, people who believe in that school of thought tend to believe that universal truths exist, and that it's the classical research and literature which is how we figure out the source of truth, because it has stood the test of time. Then you have another group called the empiricists, and the empirical literally means under test. So truth tends to be attached to statements that agree with some observed facts. So that really one of the things that empiricists will say is the value of any truth is proportionate to the amount of evidence that supports it. And they very much, in the empirical school of thought, value what can you measure through research. And if you can't measure it through research, it becomes a lot less valued by an empiricist. And then we have pragmatists. And pragmatists will essentially say, well, truth is what works. Show me the meaning of an idea or a proposition, and I'll essentially show you that it has value based on its practical and observable consequences. If you have an idea and I can't use it, I'm not interested in it. So it's a very practical, matter-of-fact way of approaching or assessing situations, solving problems, that sort of thing. And then there's postmodernism. And postmodernist thought will essentially argue that there's no objective reality, there's no ultimate truth, and that truth is really a matter of perspective or point of view. So truth lies within the individual, and each individual constructs his or her own understanding of reality. The postmodernists tend to emphasize that over history, some constructions of reality have been privileged, that is, supported by a powerful elite group, and other constructions have been suppressed. So examples of suppressed constructions include the points of view of women, the poor, and those from non-Western cultures. They tend to define truth as whatever scientists presently in power say it is, although postmodernists don't necessarily believe what scientists in power say it is. But they say that that is how one in a society would say what truth is. That, truth really results from, or what people claim to be truth, is what results from the powerful elites. And the postmodernists question the existence of truth and the ways to define it. So there, of those four different worldviews, belief, postmodernism, pragmatism, empiricism, and rationalism, the one that right now is most in vogue in higher education is postmodernism. In fact, I think if you did a survey of administrators, particularly in student affairs units, you'd probably find that 80 to 90% of them are postmodernists, and then the rest fall into the other categories. Now, there's another kind of worldview which is not as common, particularly in public higher education, but that's a worldview I'd simply call a religious worldview. So seeing truth as being defined by one's religious doctrine, perhaps sacred religious texts, and really seeing the whole world through those eyes. That what is true is what I know from a religious text, and that it's been given by God or some deity, and therefore that's true. Anything else is really subordinate to that. So that's obviously a worldview that is not common among college administrators or faculty in higher education. There's some good data to support that statement. But that is a worldview that some have, and honestly, most folks with religious worldviews where that's primary to them tend to be at private colleges, particularly those with a very strong religious emphasis. Most of that, given that we're in the United States, is at Christian colleges and universities. However, I believe very recently we had our first Islamic college recognized not too long ago, and certainly there are Jewish institutions and institutions that support other various worldviews. So that gives you an idea of worldview. So if we take that understanding, one of the things that we can see is that if, for example, a postmodernist defines spirituality or religion, they're going to likely question its value and question that those in elite statuses may have defined what's true or what's not true. And so there'll be a more, what I might call a secular definition or a secular worldview, one that values whatever the individual decides may be true. And then you have other worldviews that might look at religion and spirituality more as, what can we measure? Do we really know empirically that a particular worldview has evidence to support it? What does the archaeological evidence support? What does eyewitness testimony support? Those sorts of things. So there are lots of different ways of defining what's religion, what's spirituality. But one of the things that I think is very important for us to do is, as we're reading something, try and figure out the worldview of the person who's writing it. And that may tell us a little bit about whether it has meaning for us, to what degree, what our own worldview is, and how we'll view these discussions. So I hope that's helpful. One of the things you'll read from the Astons this week is they'll note that not only spiritual growth tends to happen in college, but it also influences other college outcomes. And the Astons have represented probably a little bit of a postmodern approach, not uniformly, but largely. and also an empirical approach to looking at issues of religion and spirituality. I also gave you a reading from Bryant, and Bryant is, from my perception, strongly postmodern with empirical knowledge and methods that tend to be used in her research. And then there are lots of other issues that are raised by this week's readings, and I think that's going to offer us fodder for some real interesting discussion. There's a big discussion, of course, always has been in higher education, over the First Amendment, and how does the First Amendment apply to issues of religion and spirituality. You have some who will articulate the point of view that there has always been a separation of church and state in our nation, that the church and state clause of the Constitution is important, and they tend to go forward from that. One of the things that's important to note is there is not the word church and state or separation of church and state in our Constitution. If you look at the First Amendment, what it essentially states is that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. So that has two basic concepts in there that are relevant. One is the establishment clause. So Congress is not to establish a religion to say this is what everyone has to believe. That comes out of when the framers of the Constitution designed our Constitution. They wanted to make sure that there wasn't the kind of practice that they saw in countries, for example, England, where they would say, well, everybody here needs to be, I believe is Episcopalian, I'm not positive, but of one particular religion. And then you have other countries, maybe other countries even today, that are mandating that residents of a particular nation need to subscribe to a particular religion. So those who framed our Constitution wanted to make sure that there was no establishment of religion. And then they also wanted to make sure that people weren't impeded from the free exercise of their religion. So how they wish to believe, how they wish to act, how they wish to behave in the guise or guidelines rather of their religion. So there are a couple things that are relevant there for us to note about our society. There are some folks who will call the freedom of religion section, they'll say that it really guarantees freedom to worship and that they support the freedom to worship. One of the things I would encourage you to be cautious about that particular phrase is that it is a very limited view on what free exercise of religion is, and it kind of puts it down to simply freedom of worship. And how that's actually worded in the Constitution is a bit broader than that. Some folks in higher ed will say that non-discrimination tends to or should trump religious freedom. And that's certainly a perspective that you'll see represented. One of the things to think about there is, in what ways do we discriminate in higher education? I discriminate weekly in higher education by assigning grades to folks, to the work of people who I believe meet certain criteria or who do not, or in making an admissions decision I discriminate. I discriminate applications that I think have merit from those that don't. So there are lots of ways that we discriminate in higher education, but it's a matter of how do we discriminate. So for example, should a student organization be allowed to stipulate certain characteristics of its members? Should a football team say that football players, that their team should be composed of players, and that those who are captains of the football team should be strongly committed to their sport? Should religious groups that are defined in terms of their worldview be allowed to select the leaders of their organizations, or should there be a different way that an administration should say that you must have this kind of way of selecting leaders and we're going to decide for you? So lots of different issues that come up here. You'll also see, I think, a worldview difference on what tends to define the concept of being male or female. And some will define that concept of male and female as a matter of anatomy. Some will define it as a matter of the mind. And so I think we need to think very carefully as we articulate our own views of, is being male or female a matter of our biology, our anatomy, or is it a matter of how we feel in our heads about whether we're male or female? And then what implications does that have? Should individuals who are anatomically male be allowed to live in an all-female residence hall because they say they feel like they're female and they believe they've been female from birth, and that their anatomy conflicts with that, and that they should be allowed to live in an area where all females live. So I think we need to think about all those arguments. We need to be careful, I think, about issues of identity and defining those and valuing the different pieces of identity that our students bring to campus. So there's a whole lot to discuss this week. So I would encourage, as always, for us to be civil and respectful of differing points of view. I anticipate there'll be different points of view in our class. That's one of the things I enjoy about this class and think makes it so strong. So let's discuss these issues, let's consider their implications, and let's have a great week.